The other day I was browsing around YouTube and a video was shown to me that was the re-editing director's cut of Rocky 4. And it was basically like an hour and a half long video that I ended up sitting through the whole thing. And it was Sylvester Stallone basically re-editing Rocky 4, 35 years later or something, whatever it was. And it made me think about how I've thought about re-editing TREP, my original animation. That's what I want to talk about today. It's a little bit different, but I'm just going to go for some of my thoughts on today's episode of the Expat Animator. So here's the video. It's called The Making of Rockyvsdrago by Sylvester Stallone. And, it was just uploaded on the 30th of October. And I just kind of stumbled across it. I'm not subscribed to his channel. But when I was watching this, it occurred to me that, when he filmed this, he wrote it, he directed it, and he starred in it. And that's kind of how I've done my animation projects, where I'm basically, the writer, the creator, the director, the editor, the animator. And I kind of like projects when people do everything or as close to everything they can by themselves. I mean, even Sylvester Stallone said, a movie still takes 500 people to make it. But the more jobs that you can take on, the more it's kind of your project. And it doesn't sound like he edited the original film. And so that's why he kind of wants to come back to it, all these years later and re-edit it. And he also has a different perspective on that film. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting from a viewpoint of a creator and, a filmmaker, although animation is not really film anymore. It's, digital, but it's the same kind of thing. You've got this project or this vision in your head and it takes you forever to get it created. And, I finished TREP in 2004. And there's times when I want to go back and either redo it or fix things, or I'd actually prefer to actually just redraw the whole thing. Although, I'll never do that. It was just too much work. I mean, I spent 2 years almost full time working on TREP, the animation. And although, it's a lot easier to animate nowadays because I don't have to draw everything on paper and scan it in one by one, page by page, and then knock out the white from the paper. I mean, the process is so much easier. And that I could animate that same show a lot faster nowadays. And I never really did anything with the TREP character after that animation until a few years ago when I decided to create a comic book out of it. And then that comic book idea went from 20 pages to eventually 80 pages, which is basically a graphic novel. And I got that graphic novel finished, but it took me about a year to do. And I was thinking, this, it's going to be a lot of work, but it can't be as much work as the animation was. And I actually redid some of that original story. So it's kind of like what Sylvester was doing right now, where he is tweaking how that story is told, using unused footage and, different cuts and shots and stuff like that. When you've spent that much time on a project, you're always going to kind of want to go back and finish it, I think. That's kind of the point. And I don't know if it's always good to do that. But in the case of what he did, he was stuck in lockdown and this was a good project for him. So he could go in every day and they could look at all the footage. And I just found it interesting. I never thought I'd watch the whole thing. It's an hour and a half, but I just watched it and it went by like nothing for me because I just kept thinking how I could see myself doing that with TREP at some point where I'm, there's no unused footage from TREP because it's an animation. But I may go back and redraw it at some point. I don't know if I ever will. I'd probably rather just do a different project. But that's kind of what the graphic novel was for me. When I did the graphic novel, the first 20 pages kind of covered the story of the original animation. And then the remaining 60 pages of the graphic novel were just continuing the story. So in that respect, it was easier for me to continue the story as a comic book versus as animation. But they're different things, and, I like them both, but even with the comic book, I want to go back and change things with that. Technologies have gotten better, and, I've learned new things, but sometimes you just got to let a project, leave it where it was. But I do think that there is the times when you could go back and redo a project, especially a project that you had so much involved in. Like, like I said, he wrote it, directed it, starred in it. And so he had a lot of time invested in that. And I think he even said that at one point, the fight choreography, they spent like 6 or 7 months doing that. I mean, like that's dedication. That's a lot of work for a project that, I can kind of relate to with some of my bigger projects. When we animated Traveling Gringos, my friend Eric and I, we worked 6 months straight on that, and we finished up about 100 episodes. And even though we were animating that digitally, where I wasn't with TREP, so I was able to animate faster, and it was a different style and stuff, but so a little bit quicker to animate. But looking back on that project, there's a lot of things that I would want to redo. But instead of redoing things, I think it's better to just do a new project. But it did get me thinking that I might want to try and redraw a couple of shots or scenes from TREP at some point, using today's technology and just trying to do everything digitally instead of paper on light table, and see what those characters would look like animated, with the newer tools that are available to us today. But I'd be curious to see how many of you out there have worked on a big project, and once it's done, you want to go back and change it, or are you better off just, leaving it as it was and never touching it again? I don't think there's a right answer to it, but I'm always a proponent of keep doing new projects. If you're a fan of the original Rocky IV film, I'm actually looking forward to this Rockyvsdrago recut now that I know that it exists, and that Stallone was the guy that is in charge of doing the new edit of it. So, I like action movies, being that TREP is an action superhero animation that I created. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he did with that as a recut. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening to me rant. And again, let me know about your own projects. If you've ever went back and re-edited them or reworked on something that you've already finished. My name is Patrick Davidson. This has been another episode of the Expat Animator. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. If you found today's video helpful, you might like some of my animation classes over at Skillshare.com. I'll put the link in the description below.